stinking bits of slime first crawled from the sea and shouted to the cold stars, "I am man." Our greatest dread has always been the knowledge of our own mortality. But tonight, we shall hurl the gauntlet of science into the frightful face of death itself. Tonight, we shall ascend into the heavens. We shall mock the earthquake. We shall command the thunders and penetrate into the very womb of impervious nature herself.
Alright, stop watching your garbage short-form content for a minute. It's time for some history. I need to take a break from our series on the brain, so let's go with 1800 scientist tier list. I settled on the 1800s because, with all due respect to all the great thinkers that came before and after this period, the 1800s is unrivaled in the pace at which world-changing discoveries were made. This is truly the mad scientist era. Just dudes with a lab, figuring out the craziest shit you've ever heard in your life. The 1800s saw such a surge in famous scientists and inventors due to the Industrial Revolution, which greatly increased public funding and interest in science by providing practical applications for those scientific discoveries. This led to a huge increase in funding for public research, the establishment of scientific institutions, and a wider dissemination of scientific knowledge through improved education and literacy rates. This access of science to all instead of just the nobility led to an explosion of discoveries. Now, yes, most of these people did still come from wealthy backgrounds, but you can't ask for everything. Prior to the 1800s, the field that was the furthest along would be mathematics. To me, this makes sense. You don't really need that much funding or resources to do math. One nerd can churn out calculus in the 1700s before we knew that you should wash your hands before and after performing surgery.
Before you eat or go to sleep, when you wake up in the morning before you brush those teeth, wash hands.
Actually, two nerds churned out calculus. Shout out Leibniz. Now, while mathematics and earlier time periods of scientific thought deserve a look too, this video will strictly be ranking scientists born between 1800 and 1900, in the most scientific metric possible, a tier list. Now, this is truly the who's who of most science fields today, so competition for the high spots on this tier list will be fierce. These individuals will be ranked based on overall prominence and impact in their field. S tier will be reserved for the truly game-changing discoveries, knowledge bombs being dropped from the heavens of our scientific forefathers. Bonus points if it was truly a difficult insight to make. Just being the first person to look at something will only get you to the mid-tiers. Now, D and F tier will hold thinkers who arguably set their field back or caused harm to society at large. But what qualifies me, of all people, to rank some of the smartest human beings to ever walk the planet? Well, nothing. But I like scientists and I like tier lists. So, like me at China Moon, let's tear into this delectable palette of piping hot biology and chemistry. Alright, first on our list, Max Planck. Born in 1858.
Check it out, Dad. You can print out the headline from the day you were born.
Woo! Pointless nostalgia.
Planck's fame as a physicist rests primarily on his role as the originator of quantum theory.
What?
I would rate that as a pretty big discovery with a high level of difficulty. Now, the old quantum theory of Planck is just a collection of results between the years of 1900 and 1925, which predate modern quantum mechanics. The theory was never complete or self-consistent, but it was instead a set of heuristic corrections to classical mechanics. Planck was twice president of the German scientific Kaiser Wilhelm Society. In 1948, it was renamed the Max Planck Society. Let's fucking go. And nowadays, it includes 83 institutions. He is also known, of course, for the Planck constant, the shortest possible theorized distance. Max Planck is a true giant, but I don't know if he quite cracks S. So many other people were working on building quantum theory at this time that I'm not sure Planck quite deserves all the credit, so I'm just going to start with a strong top of A tier from Planck. Alright, second on our list we have Ivan Pavlov. Born in 1849, Pavlov and his salivating pups are a good example of a C-tier discovery. It is not as if people didn't have an understanding of training animals before this. Pavlov just documented it and formalized the approach using a scientific methodology. I cannot knock him to D tier because he didn't do anything to hold the field back, but classical conditioning isn't especially hard to discover. It, nonetheless, was impactful on psychology. Thanks, Ivan. C tier. Up next, we have Dmitri Mendeleev. Now we're talking. Born in 1834, Mendeleev set up the first periodic table. He arranged the known elements by mass. Due to how fundamental to chemistry this is, I would put him in B just for that. But he not only assembled the early stages of the periodic table, he used that table to predict the existence of yet undiscovered elements and predict their properties. To me, this catapults him to S tier. An absolutely fundamental theory with a high level of difficulty that came along with correct predictions. The only thing that could pull him down to A tier is the first name Dmitri. Alright, up next we got Pig Boy Niels Bohr. Born in 1885, Bohr's model of the atom was a revolutionary step in understanding atomic structure and quantum theory. Bohr combined empirical evidence with theoretical physics by applying Planck's quantum ideas to atomic orbits. His model successfully explained the spectral lines of hydrogen. The synthetic element bohrium was named after him because of his groundbreaking work. Bohr then founded the Institute of Theoretical Physics at the University of Copenhagen, now known as the Niels Bohr Institute, which opened in 1920. He also contributed to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. There is no definitive historical statement of what that interpretation entails, but the common features across versions of the Copenhagen interpretation include the idea that quantum mechanics is intrinsically indeterministic, events being based completely on probabilities. I'll put Niels at the bottom of A tier below Planck. I could maybe knock him because his model of the atom was incomplete, but at that point I would say he did pretty well with the information he had. Moving on. Sigmund Freud. Oh boy. Born in 1856, Freud is really so widely known because of the way he shaped public discourse around the mind and mental health. The problem is he is a dumpster tier scientist. His theories were, for the most part, completely untestable. He is about as far from rigorous as you can get with his methodologies. Oh, and he was completely obsessed with genitalia. Maybe I'm just salty because every intro to psychology textbook starts with some pages on this clown, but I don't really care. Freud cannot hold a scientific candle to anyone else on this list. F tier. He actively held the field of psychology back and has largely contributed to the discreditation and shitting on of psychology as a pseudoscience field as a whole. Fuck off, Sigmund. That's a worse first name than Dmitri, and you know it. Alright, Marie Curie. Born in 1867, Marie Curie's research into radioactivity was groundbreaking, earning her 2 Nobel Prizes, one in physics and another in chemistry. This makes her the first person ever to win 2 Nobel Prizes. She also discovered the elements polonium and radium. Much of her work relied on refining techniques developed by others such as Henry Becquerel? I don't know how the fuck to say that. Who first observed radioactivity. Lack of understanding of radiation's dangers led to significant personal health risks and eventually killed her. Jesus. I'll place Marie Curie at the top of B tier. Her contributions were impactful and historically significant, but they were incremental rather than paradigm shifting. These aren't basic bitch C-tier discoveries, but I don't know if she compares to figures like Mendeleev or Planck. She was undeniably a trailblazer though for women in science and deserves a lot of credit for that. So, thank you, Marie Curie. Now we have the man, the myth, the legend, Sir Charles Chuck Darwin. Born in 1809, Chuck revolutionized biology with his theory of evolution by natural selection, but you already know that. His groundbreaking ideas mostly came from observations during his voyage on the HMS Beagle, where he noted the variations in finches across the Galapagos Islands, though it took him over 20 years after this voyage to actually publish his Origin of Species. Darwin was famously meticulous and slow. In fact, the only thing Darwin seemed to rush was growing that iconic and magnificent beard. I'll place Darwin in low S tier. His contributions are absolutely the backbone of modern biological thinking. This is made even more impressive because he did not have knowledge of genetics at the time, and there was large-spread backlash to his ideas. I could see you knocking him for lack of development of these ideas, as well as it being an idea that lacks the complexity to really get him into S tier, but because this is so critical to how we see biology today, I don't know how you don't put him in S tier. Up next, in our first natural history selection of this list, we have Othniel Charles Marsh. Born in 1831, Othniel was famous for his role in The Bone Wars with Edward Drinker Cope. This was a period of intense fossil hunting that led to fierce rivalries and widespread fraud. Marsh and Cope's discoveries of numerous dinosaur species helped lay the foundation for modern paleontology, but his aggressive and sometimes unethical tactics and rivalries with Cope sometimes overshadowed his contributions. Both Cope and Marsh's discoveries were accompanied by sensational accusations of spying, stealing workers and fossils, and bribery. The two men were so protective of their digging sites that they would often destroy smaller or damaged fossils to prevent them from falling into their rivals' hands, or they would fill in the excavations with dirt and rock after the fact. Nonetheless, he named iconic dinosaurs like Allosaurus, Triceratops, Brontosaurus, Stegosaurus, Ornithomimus, and Coelophysis, as well as dozens more. You could say that all this time spent focused on just winning the Bone Wars could point to Marsh not being focused enough on purely science, but I'll place him in C tier. His contributions were important, but his methods and personal vendettas often detracted from the full potential of his work. The sheer volume of his findings would put him higher without the feuding. Up next, Nikola Tesla. Born in 1856, Nikola Tesla developed the principles behind alternating current, which became the standard for electrical power distribution and revolutionized how electricity was used globally. Tesla also created the Tesla coil, a crucial component for wireless technology, and made advancements in radio transmission, even claiming to have transmitted the first radio signal before Marconi. He also built a wirelessly controlled boat, one of the first ones ever exhibited. Tesla became a well-known inventor and demonstrated his achievements to celebrities and wealthy patrons at his lab. And he was noted for his showmanship at public lectures. Tesla's eccentric personality and tendency to focus on grand and sometimes impractical ideas, like wireless global energy, meant he often lacked the resources to fully realize his potential. I'll place Tesla in B tier. His discoveries were transformative and ahead of their time, but his tendency to overstate them has led to something of a cult following for Tesla that really overestimates what he was capable of. I don't think we would be living in a world of free wireless energy if we had just listened to Nikola. Alright, moving on. I would be doing Tesla a disservice if I didn't include Edison in this list. Born in 1847, Thomas Edison was one of the most famous inventors of the 19th and 20th centuries, credited with inventing the light bulb and creating the first practical electric power system. However, much of Edison's reputation stems from his ability to commercialize and market existing ideas rather than inventing them outright. He famously clashed with Nikola Tesla over AC versus DC power, aggressively promoting direct current despite its shortcomings. Edison was also known for his businessman acumen rather than pure innovation, often taking credit for innovations he didn't fully develop himself. For these reasons, I'll place Edison in D tier. While he did contribute to key technological advances, his tendency to claim credit for others' work and his focus on profitability over pure scientific progress limit his rank. Additionally, you can say that he held back scientific progress by promoting DC power over AC power for that period. Alright, going to our next and last inventors of the list, let's look at Orville and Wilbur Wright. Born in 1867 and 1871 respectively, Orville and Wilbur are credited with inventing and flying the first successful powered controlled airplane in 1903. Their achievement was monumental, but they faced many years of trial and error, and their success relied heavily on the foundational work of others, such as the development of the aerodynamics theories by pioneers like Otto Lilienthal. While their airplane was the first to fly, it was far from the first attempt ever at powered flight, and many of their contemporaries had already experimented with various flight designs. I'll place them in C tier. I won't add any other inventors from this point on, because they would all pretty much go into C tier. They invented something very useful, it was foundational to their field, but it didn't really represent any huge paradigm shift, nor any huge mental leap. Alright, up next we have Richard Owen. Born in the early part of this period in 1804, Richard Owen was a British biologist and paleontologist best known for coining the term Dinosauria and his work on classifying prehistoric creatures. However, his contributions to paleontology were often overshadowed by his contentious personality and poor scientific decisions. Owen's depictions of dinosaurs were often inaccurate as he relied on incomplete fossil evidence. He drew some of the most ridiculous pictures you've ever seen in your life of dinos. He was also a staunch critic of Darwin's theory of evolution, refusing to accept natural selection, which significantly limited his influence on the development of evolutionary biology. Because of this, I have to place Richard Owen in D tier. While he did name the dinosaurs, his flawed reconstructions and lack of openness to new scientific ideas prevented him from making the long-lasting positive impact on paleontology that he really should have. Dang, we've been on kind of a rough stretch here. Who do we have next? Okay, John Maynard Keynes. This is our first economist on the list. Nice. Born in 1883, John Maynard Keynes was a British economist who developed, you guessed it, Keynesian economics. This school of thought advocates for government intervention to manage economic cycles. His most famous work, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, challenged classical economic thought, arguing that markets do not always self-correct and that active fiscal policies are necessary to stabilize economies. However, some critics who we will meet shortly argue that Keynes's theories, while effective in the short term, can lead to inflation and government overreach when applied too aggressively. Nonetheless, the idea that cutting government spending is completely the wrong move in an economic slump was a huge paradigm shift. Keynes believed that during a recession, if left alone, the economy would go on shrinking until it reached some sort of stability at a low-level equilibrium. Keynes called this position underemployment equilibrium. Since the Great Depression, in the United States, both parties have engaged in Keynesian stimulus measures. For this reason, I'm going to place Keynes in A tier. This has been the dominant economic policy of the past century. Stimulus during recession and increased taxes during times of growth. Actually, that second part has been kind of forgotten. A lot of the time, now countries are doing a bastardized Keynesian system where they cut taxes and subsidize during recessions, but never raise taxes or cut programs during growth. I suppose we'll see how that works out. Now, economics is a messy field, and nothing is certain for sure, but to propose a method of government management of the free market that has actually been effective is pretty impressive. A tier for Keynes. Alright, let's keep it rolling in the field of economics. Alfred Marshall. Born in 1842, Alfred Marshall was a pioneering British economist who helped shape the modern field of classical economics. His work introduced key concepts like supply and demand. Marshall's book Principle of Economics became a standard textbook for decades, but his focus was often on abstract theory rather than practical application, which limited his influence during times of economic crisis. While he laid the groundwork for later economists, his approach was sometimes too conservative and slow to adapt to the rapid changing world economy. I'll place Marshall in B tier. His contributions were solid and influential, but his theories didn't really have the transformative impact of Keynes. You could argue that he only deserves C tier for just observing phenomenon, but when dealing with social systems like economics, I'm going to bump him up a tier because conceptualizing how supply and demand works is clearly mentally more difficult than just observing an easily seen physical phenomenon. Following Marshall, let's talk about Friedrich Hayek. Economist number 3 and the rival of Keynes, born in 1899, Hayek was an Austrian-British economist and a philosopher, best known for his defense of classical economics, liberalism, and his contribution to the study of market systems. His most notable work, The Road to Serfdom, critiqued central planning and argued that overreach in economic regulation could lead to authoritarianism. Hayek's pioneering work in price theory and his emphasis on the role of information in markets highlighted how decentralized decision-making enables efficient resource allocation. He showed that a government or small group of individuals would never have all the information needed to correctly plan an economy. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1974, sharing it with Gunnar Myrdal for his contributions in the theory of money and economic fluctuations. On the other hand, many of his predictions about central planning leading directly to tyranny have been critiqued as overly dire, and his disdain for Keynesian economics has been a polarizing aspect of his legacy. I should say now that there seems to be a myth that he believed in no government intervention. This isn't true. In his book, he claims, "There can be no doubt that some minimum of food, shelter, and clothing, sufficient to preserve health and the capacity to work, can be assured to everybody." He believed that wealthy countries were definitely able to provide a minimum standard of living to all, not just for moral reasons, but because this was economically beneficial. He was also quite racist and opposed immigration and criticized, well, pretty much every other race besides his own. Despite this, he was strangely anti-nationalist. He purportedly opposed immigration because he thought it would stoke nationalist tendencies. Hayek today remains an important part of the economic discussion. While doing this research, I noticed that in 2010 and 2011, before the US economy officially recovered from the 2008 recession, there were a lot of articles published questioning the so-called victory of Keynesian economics. The slow growth following the quantitative easing brought into question the validity of the policy. I again have seen criticism of the Keynesian school following the COVID-related inflation and the 2 quantitative easing packages passed by both Biden and Trump. Although Keynesian economics has been shown to be effective situationally, it seems like just slamming the stimulus button anytime something happens that you don't like economically is also not the right move. Too much intervention can clearly be a thing. Javier Milei is having some success in Argentina for this reason. Because of this, Hayek remains relevant, and I'll put him in B tier. Now, for any true laissez-faire economists out there who think I'm a heretic for ranking Keynes above Hayek, let it be known that since the Great Depression, the world's largest economic superpower has largely followed the Keynesian school of economics. The two rivals to the US in that period have followed economic schools of thought far more interventionist than Keynesian, not less. But I'm not an economist. Let's just go B tier for Friedrich. Alright, also in the potential controversial category, we have Fritz Haber. Born in 1868, Fritz Haber was a German chemist best known for developing the Haber process, which revolutionized agriculture by enabling large-scale production of ammonia for fertilizers. This significantly increased crop yields and has arguably fed billions. However, his legacy is deeply controversial. Haber also played a key role in the development of chemical weapons during World War I, notably chlorine gas, which led to horrific casualties on the battlefield. While his work in chemistry was undeniably important, it's marred by the lasting impact of his involvement in warfare. I'll place Fritz Haber in C tier. I might take heat for this because he literally is one of the inventors of chemical warfare, but you most likely owe your life to the Haber process. It is estimated that the global population would be less than half of what it is today without the ability to make nitrogen fertilizers. What am I to do with a man who killed millions but saved billions? C tier. Alright, after Fritz we have Alfred Wegener. Born in 1880, Alfred is best known for his theory of continental drift, which proposed that the continents were once connected and have since drifted apart. He is the first one to notice that the continents fit together kind of like a puzzle. This seems like a huge mental leap, but we also hadn't had good maps of the world for that long, so I get why people before this wouldn't connect the dots. While his ideas were groundbreaking, he faced strong resistance from the scientific community during his time because he couldn't provide a viable mechanism for how the continents could drift across the Earth's surface. He proposed both the centrifugal force of the Earth's rotation and tidal forces as explanations. He also thought that the continents were moving at a rate of 250 centimeters per year. Yes, 2.5 meters per year. The real rate is 2.5 centimeters per year. It's understandable then that he was laughed out of the room for his theory. Alfred was largely ignored until the 1960s when the development of plate tectonics provided the evidence that he lacked. Although he was ahead of his time, the inability to convince his contemporaries and his reliance on unproven ideas behind the continental movement limit his impact on the era. I'll place Wegener in D tier. His theory was significant, but the way he presented it was arguably counterproductive. I need a palate cleanser after these guys. Okay, Albert Einstein, a freebie. S tier. Not much to say. Hopefully you know who Einstein is and his many contributions to physics. Although, I will note I don't necessarily think he should be undisputed S tier. He certainly does not exist in a tier all on his own. Physics was more or less primed for Einstein to make his discoveries. I think if you moved Einstein to A and Max Planck to S, I would disagree, but I would applaud you for your boldness. S tier, perhaps a tad overrated, but he is so highly rated to begin with that he is still in S tier. Moving right along to Gregor Mendel. Born in 1822, Gregor is known as the father of genetics, thanks to his groundbreaking work with pea plants, where he established the foundational laws of inheritance. His meticulous experiments led to the formulation of Mendel's laws, including the principles of segregation and independent assortment, which explained how traits are passed down from one generation to the next. While Mendel's work went largely unrecognized during his lifetime, it became the cornerstone of modern genetics after it was rediscovered in the 20th century. His use of statistical analysis was ahead of its time, allowing him to identify patterns in heredity that weren't fully understood until later. I'll place Mendel in A tier. Very impactful and a tough discovery for a monk. Even though he probably fabricated a lot of his data, it doesn't matter because he nailed it. Up next, Ernest Rutherford. Born in 1871, Ernest Rutherford is considered the father of nuclear physics, thanks to his discovery of the nucleus of the atom in 1911. His famous gold foil experiment demonstrated that atoms have a dense, positively charged center, revolutionizing our understanding of atomic structure. Now, while Rutherford's contributions to nuclear physics were monumental, his work was overshadowed by other breakthroughs of people like Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein. Despite his discovery, Rutherford didn't quite reach the same level of conceptual innovation of some of his contemporaries. I'll place Rutherford in C tier for that reason. He ran an experiment and made a discovery. Similarly, up next we have Santiago Ramon y Cajal. Born in 1852, Santiago was a Spanish neuroscientist whose pioneering work laid the foundation for much of modern neuroscience. He is best known for his detailed drawings of neurons and their intricate connections, which helped establish the neuron doctrine, revolutionizing our understanding of the nervous system. His work on the brain structure earned him a Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 1906. His meticulous observations are enough to get him into C tier. Alright, James Clerk Maxwell. Born in 1831, James was a Scottish physicist who wrote Maxwell's equations and unified our understanding of electricity, magnetism, and light into a single theoretical framework. His work provided the foundation of much of modern physics, including his theory of electromagnetic waves, which would lead to later breakthroughs in technologies such as radio, television, and wireless communication. Maxwell's contributions also advanced our understanding of thermodynamics and statistical mechanics. I'll place Maxwell in the bottom of A tier. His contributions were no doubt large, and I think that they came with a high level of difficulty. Combining light and electromagnetism conceptually is a tough thing to do, and critical to much of the science that came after. Okay, Ludwig Boltzmann. Born in 1844, Boltzmann was an Austrian physicist who worked on statistical mechanics and thermodynamics. He established a connection between the microscopic behavior of atoms and the macroscopic phenomenon like heat and pressure. It was Boltzmann who theorized the reason that heat behaves the way it does is because of the movement of particles. His development of the Boltzmann distribution and statistical interpretation of entropy faced immense challenges. At the time, the very existence of atoms was still controversial, with many scientists rejecting the atomic theory of matter. Boltzmann's ideas were deeply counterintuitive as they linked abstract microscopic behavior to observable macroscopic phenomenon which few could grasp. For this reason, his work was met with fierce resistance from prominent figures like Ernst Mach, and even his own mental health suffered under the weight of the opposition. Despite these struggles, his theories eventually became the foundation of modern physics, influencing areas like quantum mechanics and statistical physics. Before learning more about Boltzmann, I did not expect to place him in S tier, but I think I have to. His groundbreaking ideas overcame significant scientific skepticism and paved the way for future advancements, making him a true pioneer. He didn't simply discover or observe something, he made a big mental jump to propel physics forward. Up next we have Schrödinger. Born in 1887, Erwin Schrödinger was an Austrian physicist known for his development of wave mechanics and the Schrödinger equation, which became a fundamental part of quantum mechanics. His work provided a way to describe the behavior of particles on a quantum level, particularly electrons, and his equation remains a cornerstone of modern physics. However, Schrödinger's ideas were not entirely groundbreaking in isolation, as they built on the work of others, including Max Planck and Niels Bohr. His contributions to quantum mechanics were significant, but his philosophical musings are what really catapulted him into the limelight. Also, no one understands Schrödinger's cat as a thought experiment, so I'm going to try to rectify that here. The concept was devised by Schrödinger in 1935 in a discussion with Einstein to illustrate what Schrödinger saw as the problems of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. Schrödinger described how one could, in theory, create a superposition in a large-scale system by making it dependent on a quantum particle that was in a superposition. He proposed his famous scenario of a cat in a box to explain this. According to Schrödinger, the Copenhagen interpretation implies that the cat could remain both alive and dead until the state has been observed. Schrödinger did not wish to promote the idea of dead and alive cats as a serious possibility. On the contrary, he intended the example to illustrate the absurdity of the existing view. Although originally a critique on the Copenhagen interpretation, Schrödinger's seemingly paradoxical thought experiment now has become part of the foundation of how we teach quantum mechanics. Einstein responded to Schrödinger in agreement. He said, "You are the only contemporary physicist besides Lau who sees that one cannot get around the assumption of reality. Most of them simply do not see what sort of risky game they are playing with reality. Reality as something independent of what was experimentally established. Their interpretation is, however, refuted most elegantly by your system of radioactive atom, plus amplifier, plus charge of gunpowder, plus cat in a box, which, the psi function of the system, contains both a cat alive and blown to bits. No one really doubts that the presence or absence of the cat is something independent of the act of observation." So, Einstein agrees with Schrödinger that the cat cannot both be alive and dead. To this day, there is not a consensus about whether large-scale objects like a cat could exist in a superposition. Theories like quantum decoherence claim that large systems would lose their quantumness. Others in the field of relational quantum mechanics think that something's state is completely relative, meaning the state is the interaction between the observers in the system. Under this approach, to someone inside the box, like the cat, there might be a definitive state. To someone outside the box, the superposition remains until they observe it. There are a million more explanations of the thought experiment. Just know that it is not universally accepted that the cat is both alive and dead. Schrödinger didn't think that, and neither did Einstein. I would venture to guess that the average physicist would tell you that macro-scale objects cannot exist in significantly different superpositions, like being both alive and dead. So stop using this as a tool to teach about how particles work. It is meant to do the exact opposite. Now, with that ran aside, the most impressive thing Schrödinger did was predict the existence of DNA in his paper, What is Life? He proposed that heredity is best explained by an aperiodic crystal molecule with a repeating structure that could code script for different functions of life. So he basically exactly described DNA without being able to see it or even being a biologist. This paper was highly influential on Watson and Crick, who would go on to discover DNA. Because of this prediction, as well as his other achievements in physics, I will put Schrödinger in high A tier. Alright, Gustav Kirchhoff. Born in 1824, Gustav was a German physicist best known for his circuit laws, which form the backbone of electrical engineering. His laws describe how current and voltage are distributed in electrical circuits, enabling the analysis and design of complex systems. Beyond his contributions to circuit theory, Kirchhoff also made significant advancements in spectroscopy. He and Robert Bunsen discovered that elements emit unique spectral lines, leading to the identification of new elements like cesium and rubidium. B tier, solid fundamental work, but no huge mental leaps or paradigm shifts. Alexander Fleming, the Trash Man. Born in 1881, Fleming was notoriously messy in the lab, which contributed to his discovery of penicillin. In 1928, he noticed that mold contaminating one of his petri dishes had killed the surrounding bacteria, leading him to identify the mold as Penicillium notatum, which transformed healthcare and effectively ended the era where minor infections were often fatal. This would be a regular C-tier discovery if antibiotics weren't so damn useful. Millions, if not billions, owe their lives to this man's lack of workspace hygiene. A tier. And moving on to our last serious entry of the list, the partner in crime of Gustav, we have Robert Bunsen. Born in 1881, Bunsen was another German chemist best known for developing, you guessed it, the Bunsen burner, a laboratory staple used by generations of scientists. Beyond his famous burner, Bunsen made significant contributions to spectroscopy, working with Gustav to identify new elements like cesium and rubidium by analyzing their spectral lines. His work advanced our understanding of chemical analysis and helped establish spectroscopy as a powerful tool in chemistry and physics. While Bunsen was a brilliant experimentalist, his contributions were more practical and collaborative than groundbreaking on their own, but he did some nice work and made a very useful device. He's something of a friendly neighborhood scientist, which I can appreciate. I will place Bunsen in B tier. His innovations were important and widely influential, but they are more tools for discovery than transformative scientific theories. And moving on to our last entry, and more of a cautionary tale. We have Trofim Lysenko. Born in 1898, Trofim was a Soviet agronomist and biologist. He rejected established genetics, favoring pseudoscientific theory of Lamarckian inheritance. This is the idea that an organism could pass down traits acquired during their lifetime. He once claimed that exposing seeds to extreme cold could teach plants to survive harsh winters, a claim backed by no real evidence, but implemented across vast swaths of Soviet farmland, with catastrophic results. His policies were enforced across the Soviet Union under Stalin's regime, suppressing genetic research and leading to the persecution and imprisonment of many scientists, including the execution of some prominent geneticists. His agricultural practices based on flawed science contributed to widespread crop failures and famines, compounding the human suffering in the Soviet Union. Like everyone else connected to Soviet agriculture in the 1930s, this man was a disaster, and for that, he has earned himself a place in F tier. So, what do you think? Do you agree with me, or did I shit all over your favorite scientist? Did I leave anyone off the list that I shouldn't have? Send me a letter.